Hello and welcome. My name is Charlie Hogg, and tonight we're exploring the topic, Wounds Heal with Forgiveness. And perhaps before I begin to explore this subject, I should just tell you a little bit about myself. I am in Australia. I grew up in Melbourne. And I think from quite a young age, perhaps like most of you watching this session, I was a searcher. I was looking for something. I wouldn't say I was really unhappy at all, actually, but it felt like there was a lot more to life than what I was offered. I went to university and I started architecture. But this search, this sort of yearning for more meaning in my life became really strong. And so when I was about 20 years old, I took a one-way ticket to Kuala Lumpur, to Malaysia, and I traveled for a couple of years. And I went through Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. And on my journey, without really a conscious decision, I spent time living in so many religious communities. I lived with Sikhs, I lived with Buddhists, I lived with Muslims during Ramadan. I went to the Ganges, bathed in the Ganges. I lived with a yogi in the Himalayas. I went to the Dalai Lama's place in Dharamsala in India. I traveled through the Middle East. I lived in a Christian community in Belgium. And I really loved everything. But I was really looking for an experience, I would say. I was looking for how do you translate all these lovely things, these beliefs, these truths into an experience. And when I settled in London, I came in touch with the Brahma Kumaris there. And as soon as I saw some of the members of the Brahma Kumaris, it was like some feeling, some vibration. It felt like they had experienced something. So that was 45 years ago, and I'm still on the journey. And I would say that a huge part of my journey has been to let go and forgive myself, and to let go and forgive others. And I think probably there's no greater step to a sense of personal freedom than to free myself from some feelings of deep anger and hurt that often we carry for a lot of our lives. And I must admit, on my journey, I've been amazed because I do take courses in meditation. And so many times I've taught meditation to people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. And people are carrying things from their childhood, carrying things from their teen years. And yet they just can't let it go. And when this sense of hurt festers and festers and festers, it just builds up so much and really influences the quality of my present life. And I really do feel that forgiveness is an essential part of our spiritual journey. And to me, forgiveness is a huge spiritual power, I would say. It can change the most negative situation into the most positive. It can change a stalemate of ego and anger into a reconciliation, a resolution. It can let someone, let go pain that's been held for a long time in their life. Sometimes I think the pain builds up like a pressure. Forgiveness is like a release valve that lets all the pressure out. Frees myself. Forgiveness allows love to flow again. Forgiveness is such an act of courage and humility, I would say. And yet for me, looking at our world at the moment, what do we see in the world? It's like we all have our own collective histories. We are carrying the weight of our history, whether it's our collective history or our personal history. And it's like past events, past hurts, anger, resentments, like a big shadow over the present that doesn't allow us to move forward, whether it's me as an individual or whether it's as a group collectively. We hold on to these things. Often I feel, what is it that holds on? I think it's our ego that identifies with all these things. We don't let them go. And so it's like this huge shadow which takes away the joy of the present. How can we move forward? How can we let go? I think the great power of forgiveness is the answer to that question. And in 1994, I traveled to South Africa. And it was sort of amazing in a way because I had planned the trip, I think, 6 months before. But I landed just a couple of days after Nelson Mandela had been made president. I can remember flying into Johannesburg, and there's these huge billboards because Bill Clinton and many of the world leaders had come to celebrate, the freedom from oppression that South Africa was feeling. And what was really astounding is the whole country was like having a party. Not just the Africans, but the Asians, the whites, all the community seemed to feel free. And I really learned that, when we move out of an old regime into something new, it's not just the people who were the Africans in that case that were liberated that were happy. Everyone felt relieved and freed from the past situation. But while I was there, I went on a retreat with the Brahma Kumaris in the Orange Free State. And this is a state with huge wheat farms, huge farms owned by some of the white farmers. And we went to one farm for our retreat. There was a beautiful little retreat place on this farm. And there was maybe, I think, 30 of us, mixed race group of Africans, Asians, and whites, as they're called in South Africa. And when I arrived, the man who owned the farm showed us around, and he was very sweet and kind to us. And when we got to his house, he had these huge sort of metal turrets on each corner of his house with a ladder and a little box on the top of these high metal turrets. I suppose that's the best way of describing them. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, we expected that when Nelson Mandela became president, that all the Africans would come and claim back their land. And me and my brother, my family's been here for 4 generations, we felt we needed to defend our land." And I said to him, "Why didn't it happen? Why didn't they come and take your land?" And he pondered for a while, he thought. And then he just said quietly the example of Nelson Mandela. And he said that he never once said that apartheid was right. Nelson Mandela was always totally opposed to that regime. But the people perpetuating that regime, it's like he forgave them. And in a way, his behavior was an example to all other Africans that they could move into the future without, to let go perhaps that bitterness of the way they were treated, because Nelson Mandela wanted to create a whole new flavor. And he knew that if we live in the past with lots of recrimination, it wouldn't work. Even though they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which had to resolve some of the crimes, generally for the whole population, he wanted them to forgive and move forward as a whole country. And I really learned there that the power of forgiveness, if one person demonstrates it, it can influence so many. And in my life, if I think and feel, well, how do I feel when I forgive? All of us have been wronged. Every one of us has been the brunt of injustice. Every one of us has been falsely accused. It's a part of life's journey. But how do I respond? And I remember once here in Australia, I met a man who told me that he grew up in Europe, and he had very bad feelings of his childhood in Europe. Many things happened, and he didn't want to go back there. And after 20 years of being in this country, he decided to go back to his village in Europe. And when he got there, he said just almost naturally he started to let go and forgive all the stuff of the past. And I remember when he came back, I asked him, how did that feel? Because he told me the story. He said, I just felt so light. I felt so much better, but I have a huge regret. And I said, what is that? He said, I wish I had done it 20 years ago. He said, I've spent 20 years feeling so angry, so bitter, so hurt, so negative. He said, I ruined my own life as a result of it. And I think we all know how we can hold on to things, because when we hold on, we can just burn in that deep sense of hurt and resentment and anger. And the big trap is that I feel so justified. My lack of forgiveness, my blaming, my hatred, my negativity, I feel so justified in my position. But ultimately, what does it do to the quality of my life? I can become very bitter and very twisted when I do. And I would say that forgiveness is the cancellation of all the conditions in my mind that stop the flow of love and happiness. Forgiveness is the cancellation of all the conditions in my mind that stop the flow of love and happiness. Each time I can't forgive, I suppress my love, I suppress my happiness. I would say nothing in life makes us healthier than when I express love and I express happiness. Each time I can't forgive, I'm saying, you've done this, I'm not going to love you. You've done this, I'm not going to love you. This happened, I'm not going to be happy because of it. That happened, I'm not going to be happy. So actually, I'm suppressing myself. Forgiveness is like a decision about the quality of life. That I want peace. I don't want a life of bitterness and recrimination. Forgiveness is really, I would say, one of the great acts of the human spirit. And I remember a story I once heard. Actually, I was driving someone I heard on the radio. And it was a man who had been actually married into a regime, a family of the president of a country. And he told this story in great detail. I was driving somewhere. It was absolutely riveting, to be honest. And he said he married the daughter of the president and he lived better than any prince. He said we just lived at this extraordinary lifestyle. There was a coup and his whole family was purged. And he spent 6 years living in a cell that he said was damp, had water, was full of rats. He was absolutely sick. He wasn't fed properly. And he said, I went from one extreme to the absolute other extreme. He said it was such a hell. And while he was in jail, he turned to God. As he said, it was the only hope I had was just this feeling to have a connection with God. And then the leader who purged him left. He was exiled. We know how this happens in some parts of the world. And many, many years later in a foreign country, the person who was jailed met the person who had purged him. And he said to him, I forgive you. And this man who had purged him put him in a cell with rats and filth. There was no, place to go to the toilet. He just had to do this in the cell. You could imagine the atmosphere there. That he said, I forgive you. And the next day the man who had purged him came back and said, I treated you worse than an animal and you have forgiven me. You have changed my life. And sometimes I think the power to forgive someone when obviously they've done something wrong, maybe they've been dishonest, whatever it may be, can shift something so deep. And this man said, my life will change forever because my actions were wrong, but you forgave me. And I think that, forgiveness is an incredible act, and I say an essential part of our spiritual journey. Christ, before he was crucified, said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because those who were going to crucify him did really not know who he was or really what way they were doing. But not anger, a sense of forgiveness. And in my spiritual journey, I've often thought, well, how can you tell someone is spiritual? Is it because they meditate a lot or no? It's really, I would say, the greatest manifestation of spirituality is in my relationships with others, how I really treat others and deal with others. And from my experience, that if I am negative to people, if I hold the faults or weaknesses, if I remember people's past, if I hold them accountable all the time for what they've done in the past, deep down I don't feel very spiritual. But if I'm able to show compassion, to let go and even forgive others, deep down it feels right. It feels like we need to give other people that opportunity. And I think all of us would have had a life experience where maybe you've made a mistake. You've done something wrong, something you regret, and someone says, it's okay, don't worry, let's move on. And that forgiveness is such a gift that clears your inner world, your conscience, and frees you from maybe an action or behavior that you really regret yourself. To me, to offer forgiveness to another is such an incredible gift. But I would say that I have many questions about forgiveness because it's a very, very deep subject and we all face so many different situations in life. How do I know how to respond? The first one for me is it easy to forgive? And what answer would we give to that? Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. And one of the big challenges with forgiving someone else, or even the self, but forgiving someone else is that I didn't agree with what happened. What you did, what you said, what happened is against my truth, is against my values. So if I forgive you, it's like saying what you did was okay. And I remember once in Australia here, the Brahma Kumaris have 3 beautiful retreat centres. Every weekend of the year we have live-in retreats. And I was in our retreat centre in Melbourne and I was doing a talk about the law of karma, which is the law of action, reaction. As you sow, so you reap. The law of cause and effect. And I was talking about this and then one young woman spoke and she was quite emotional. There was probably about 30, 40 people there. And she said, how can I forgive someone? I was abused as a child. And to be honest, the atmosphere in the room was very sort of silent. When someone speaks with such passion, I didn't really feel I could answer at that point because almost any answer can trivialize what that poor person had been through. So it was silent. And then another woman spoke. And she spoke so calmly and with so much dignity. And she said, I also was abused as a child. And she said, I felt so hurt and angry and bitter. But I realized as I moved into my adult life that I was ruining my own life and that I had to move forward. So I was able to say, it wasn't right what happened, but for my peace, for my future, for my dignity, I'm going to let it go and move on. It was just an amazing scene that the perfect answer came for that young woman, and she felt so supported when she heard that. So it is a challenge, I think, for many of us that, we feel, well, I want to forgive, but am I just saying, well, what you did was okay when I still don't feel it was okay? Another question that comes is, are there limits to forgiveness? Should we always just forgive? And I remember once hearing Simon Wiesenthal, who was in one of the Nazi death camps. He was Jewish in the Second World War. And we all know about that very unpleasant history. And Simon said that one day he was summoned to the bed of a dying Nazi. And this Nazi wanted to confess what he had done to Jews in front of a Jew. He was dying. He had a lot of burden on his conscience of his own behavior. And so Simon was, forced to sit down and listen. So he said he listened, and this man who was dying spoke of all the atrocities he had committed against Jewish people. And Simon said, I listened. I didn't say one word of forgiveness or compassion or understanding. And he later said, I was in this real quandary. This man was dying. And yet, have I forgiven him for what he did? At that point, he was couldn't really move himself to speak or say anything. So sometimes it is a challenge for us. Are there limits to forgiveness? And sometimes another question I have, do we sometimes have selective forgiveness? I think we do. Have you ever noticed that you may have two members of your family? One of them behaves badly and you will just let it go. Water off a duck's back. You just don't see it much. You just deal with it. Another one does the same behavior and you feel so angry. You can't let it go. You can't forgive. It's a very interesting scenario, isn't it? That we have a different dynamic in our relationship that we can let go easily, and others we hold on to the things of their behavior. And sometimes I think that deep down, all of us have this innate nature to forgive. I think it's a part of the human DNA. But often it's so suppressed by contemporary life and busyness and selfishness and my own needs that it doesn't often emerge. And I can remember one friend who was in Turkey, in Istanbul. I think it must be a long time ago now, 25 years. There was a massive earthquake. And unfortunately, so many people passed on. And they weren't allowed to leave their homes for about a week. And she said, because they were worried about aftershocks and all sorts of things. And finally, she said she came out and went for a walk around the water. If you know Istanbul, it's an incredibly beautiful city. When you walk around the water, the Bosphorus, it's a beautiful walk. And she said just as she started walking, there was a car accident. And she said mostly there, people are very hot-tempered and get out, and often there's a big argument and even a fight. And these two men got out of their cars, they went up to each other and they hugged each other. She said it was the most extraordinary thing to see, that because of what everyone had been through, everyone was suffering. That compassion, that empathy was there. So that forgiveness, don't worry, it's okay. These things happen in life. And so sometimes, we forgive in certain situations, forgive in certain environments, forgive certain people, but we even hold on to things of other people. And another question I sometimes think, do you need to see somebody to forgive them, to talk to them? Because sometimes, unfortunately, fractured relationships, hearts move away and people don't speak. And so I'm just holding this feeling of a relationship that's been really severed badly, and I can't do much to heal it. And I have a friend in Melbourne, a very, very special person. And he was telling me that he had a big falling out with one of his best friends. And they hadn't spoken for years. And this friend of mine really began to engage with his spiritual journey and meditation. And you know, when you step onto your spiritual journey, you start to reflect about the unfinished business of life. Maybe things I've done wrong, mistakes I've made that I want to heal, resolve, forgive, let go, move on, etc. And he was remembering his relationship with his friend. And he really wanted to heal this. But whenever he rang him, he wouldn't answer his call. You know that these days on digital phones you can see the name of the person, and his friend wouldn't answer his call. And then he really began to reflect deeply about the relationship. And what he said was he started to see that I was saying to my friend, okay, let's heal, let's forgive, let's move on, let's be friends again. But when he looked deeply into himself, he still was holding this feeling, I was right and you were wrong. And you know what he said? He said when he let go this feeling, he did work on himself and he took responsibility for his own actions. His friend answered his call. I thought that was really powerful, that often we want to heal, we want to forgive, we want to resolve relationships, but deep down my ego still holds this feeling, I was right and you were wrong. And so hence, we can't really resolve the feelings between us. Some say that forgive and forget. Do you think it's possible? I don't. I don't think you ever really forget things, but you can lose the hurt surrounding a situation. So maybe there's a hurtful situation, you do forgive, and it lessens the pain of that situation inside your heart, but you're not going to forget it. It will still be in your mind. And even a question comes in my mind sometimes, when should we forgive? When should we forgive? And I remember that I was with a woman whom I'd known for a long time who got cancer, and she became terminal. And one day I was with her and we were just chatting. She was a very open person, and I don't know why, something I just said to her, is there anything you regret in your life that you would like to resolve before you move on? Instantly I said that, the instant a little tear just came pop in the corner of her eye. And she said to me and my mother haven't spoken for 15 years. We haven't seen each other. And I said to her, well, if it was me, I would definitely want to see her. But, you know, we are all different, and that's one of my huge lessons in life. Every one of us is different, and we approach things in a different way. But she listened, and she actually contacted her mother, went to see her mother. And I asked her, how was it? And she said, well, it wasn't perfect, but it was like a huge relief, something that had built up in her. And she really offered her mother apologies, even though it was from both sides. She said that her mother didn't shift that much, but she felt it's something that she wanted to do. And it really made me realize that often people, when we are on our deathbed, it's then the unfinished business of life comes in front, and I want to deal with it then. But actually, often I can't deal with it then for different reasons. And I think often if I have the courage, and it does take courage to look at my life and look at parts of my life that are unhealed. It may be a relationship, it may be a situation, it may be one of my behaviors or my actions. And do what I need to now to free myself from that held pain which I have inside, to forgive myself, to forgive others, to move on in my life. I wouldn't wait until that time. If I'm really on my spiritual journey now, I feel a way to free myself, a way to move forward, is to look at those parts of my life and see if there's ways that I can forgive, heal, and move forward. Because, the whole process of forgiveness, I think, goes to the heart of the spiritual journey. And I think one of the thoughts I have is, how keen am I to cancel the conditions in me that suppress my love and happiness? Because each time I can't forgive, I'm suppressing my love, my loving nature, and my happy nature. How keen am I? Or do I want to continue with hurt and unhappiness and bitterness and all these feelings? It's almost like a realization. Let me free myself. Let me have a life of peace. Let me work with my conscience to resolve some of the feelings which I've carried and the feelings that I have about others. And then maybe there's a sense of acceptance, and I can communicate, whether to others or maybe even to myself. When this happened, I felt this. I can express to people why the way you behave, what you did, made me feel this. I'm not accusing, I'm just explaining my feeling. But now I want to accept you, I want to accept me, I want to move on. I don't want to live this life of self-punishment anymore. I'm going to free myself. And really, I think it takes an incredible amount of spiritual strength. Where do I find such spiritual strength? And all I can say for me is that I feel it's the relationship with God, a loving relationship with God, that gives me such a power to let go almost anything of the past, to forgive myself and others and move forward in life. Otherwise, we just remain stuck. And the more I remain stuck in that place of my bad actions, my bad behavior, others, my self-respect goes really low. I've observed in myself, when my self-respect is high, I feel others are blameless. I don't hold on to stuff. I don't feel a victim. When my self-respect is really low, I feel a victim, and you've done this, you've done this. It's almost like a shopping list of all the things that have happened. And so we know some things are minor and I can let them go, but some things are profoundly deep in the psyche. And to me, this is where the one thing that really frees me is the relationship with God. Not just that relationship, but a real feeling of being loved, deeply loved by God. And for me, this whole spiritual life is like a life of love. And it's love that enables me, it gives me the power to forgive. And to me, there's probably three sources of love. There's love from the self, love from the divine, from God, and love from my family and friends. In this world, not much love coming for the self. Often we're very self-critical, extremely self-critical, to the point somewhere of self-dislike or even self-hatred. So for most, not much love coming from the self. From God, many of us just don't really know who God is. And if we do have faith in God, I think it's faith gives strength, but there's not a real sense of love and belonging. So my one source of love is my family and friends. And if there's some upheaval, if there's some problem, if there's a loss, it's like my whole life goes into upheaval. What is spirituality? Spirituality, I would say, is having a loving relationship with myself as a soul, a spiritual being, and a loving relationship with God as a spiritual being. And when I lay that platform in my life, it builds a power in me to be able to resolve and heal myself. And that first relationship with myself as a spiritual being. And in my own self-reflection, I've observed 3, shall we say, parts within me, 3 personalities. I would say 2 of them can't forgive. 2 of them hold on. And 1 of them enables me to let go. And the first personality I call the I of arrogance, or the I of superiority. This personality takes this whole sense of identity from my temporary body. Who am I? I'm this set of labels. And this one, the arrogance, the ego, when this is ruling in my inner system, I compare with others and I think I am better, I know more, I am right. And when it comes into my feelings, that's when I feel so easily insulted, disrespected, not valued, hurt, sensitive, all that range of feeling. And so whenever those feelings are coming to me, feeling of really all those hurt and insult, what I often think is, no, my ego is ruling in my inner system. My ego is sovereign inside. I'm being deceived by my ego. When my ego is ruling in my inner world, I can't forgive other people. It's my ego that holds on to the pain. You've done this, you've said this, this has happened, and I will hold on to it, and I will just lose myself in justification of how I feel. So it's my ego that holds on to that lack of forgiveness towards others. But the second I is the flip side, is perhaps we could call the ego of inferiority, the lack of self-respect, the I of lack of self-respect. And this I also takes this whole sense of identity from my temporary body. And this I really begins to think that I shouldn't think about these things at all. Excuse me, just one sec. There you are. I'm sorry, our phones are ruling our world at the moment. And this I, actually, I would say, it is the one that when it's ruling in my inner world, I begin to think, I compare with others and I think others are better, others know more, others are right, others don't love me, others don't value me. And when it comes into my feelings, that's when I feel hopeless, inadequate, inferior, unworthy, depressed, all those sorts of feelings. And this is the I that can't forgive the self. I make a mistake, I remind myself time and time again, and what do? I just build up this sense of hopelessness about myself. Look at you. And often I do a little mistake, and yet I give myself life imprisonment for that little mistake. So my ego can't forgive others, and my lack of self-respect can't forgive me. The third I is the eternal self, the permanent self, the soul. And this is the deep work of the spiritual journey. Actually, I don't have to really worry too much about my ego and lack of self-respect. You know, the more I begin to know and experience who I am, automatically I begin to heal and have the ego and lack of self-respect have less influence over me. The soul is a wonder. The soul is just a point. In mathematics, a point exists, but it has no length, breadth, or width. It's absolutely indivisible. The soul lives in the brain, in the front of the brain, around in the center of the forehead. I am the soul. The soul is acting through the body. And when I begin to realize that I'm a soul, I can never die. The soul's immortal, eternal, non-physical energy. The soul doesn't hold any of the labels of gender and nationality and religion. As I start to move back into my state of soul consciousness, I start to move back automatically into my self-respect. And when I move into my self-respect, it's like my fundamental sense of who I am. It's not a sense of self based on successes and wealth and career and education and skills and talents. It's a fundamental sense of myself. And when I step back into that place of self-respect, everything comes back into perspective. And I begin to see that, yes, when I was under the influence of my ego and lack of self-respect, then sometimes things happened and I didn't know how to respond. So I couldn't forgive, whether it's others or myself. But now I've started to build up more understanding of who I am. And the first step, I would say, and really rebuilding an ability to heal wounds with forgiveness is to know and experience myself as a soul. The second step is to have a loving relationship with the Supreme Soul. And I often feel the subtext of life is the search for true love. You know, in love is closeness, belonging, respect, so many intrinsic qualities that build a good life. And I invest my heart in relationships. It's the most natural thing to do. We all do it. It's in our DNA to relate, to connect, to build a relationship. But there's a huge human dilemma. And that is that no relationship is permanent. Whether it's change, whether it's time, whether it's separation, whether it's death, the object of my love will go. And so we have built up all this insecurity in ourselves. There's one permanent relationship, and that's the relationship with the Supreme. And this is really what we explore when we sit in meditation. That I, the soul, connect with the Supreme Soul. And when I feel that sense of bond, that closeness, that love in a real sense, I have a power that enables me to move on in life, to observe the past, learn from it, not deny it, but forgive, let go, and move forward. And just as I see myself as a soul, as this micro point, that's how I see God too. God is just a soul like me, but a soul that remains permanently pure, is never influenced, is never affected, retains that quality. And meditation isn't just sitting and believing in that Supreme Soul. It's actually a real living relationship with a real living pulsating being. So I'm not just meditating on an intellectual idea, a concept or a belief. I'm actually connecting with a real being. And when I'm able to feel that connection, it releases an extraordinary inner strength to be able to even observe what has happened in my life, observe my past, observe situations, be honest with myself, and make that powerful decision. I want a life of peace. I don't want to hold on to all the hurt and anger and negativity. It influences each moment of my life and therefore even affects my family and relationships too. And so this connection, this loving relationship with the Supreme Soul, and gives me the power to genuinely heal the wounds through forgiveness. All the wounds of hurt, whether it's my own behavior or even others' behavior. And the way I'm looking at it today is that even I've been using the word meditation, But I feel that sometimes a lot of us today, when we sit, we want to meditate. We really want the results of meditation, but it often feels just too difficult, to sit down, and my mind is so overactive. It wanders all over the place, and I think, oh. And then I have this subtle feeling, I can't do it. It's just too hard. And that's where what I've learned from the Brahma Kumaris is that we just remember. We remember the divine. We remember God. And when you remember, you're doing the most natural thing of your consciousness. There is nothing more natural to your consciousness than to remember. Every millisecond, you're remembering what you have to do, remembering what you just did, remembering what someone said, etc. And each time you do, it's like the thread of your intellect, which is a part of the soul, connects with something. Each time your intellect touches something, connects with something, plugs into a person, a situation, a memory, you're influenced by it. It's like you put yourself under a shadow of influence, and then you download back into your mind an experience or a feeling. So if you're sitting here now listening to this session, and you connect with something you did in the past, which was a really huge support to a friend or a family member, then as soon as you remember that, you feel good inside. You feel calm. You're influenced by that, and you feel very comfortable. But if you remember something which, a mistake you made, you hurt somebody, and you can't forgive yourself for it, the second your intellect touches that memory, you're influenced by it, and that heavy feeling, that burden feeling, that unhappy feeling comes back into your mind. In other words, all day long I'm connecting to the past, to the future, to people, to situations. Depending on the situation, as soon as I touch, it's instant. There's no time. I'm influenced and I have a feeling. Hence, during the day, my moods go up and down and up and down. The absolute logic of Raja Yoga is to remember the lover of the soul, remember the divine, remember God. And this is what I really try to do in my life, that as I go around, as I interact with people, fulfill responsibility, I'm training myself to keep that connection. Of course, sometimes you have to concentrate on situations, but when you don't have to, rather than processing, analyzing, go back and connect with the Supreme Soul, a soul like me, but an unlimited ocean of love, peace, power, happiness, a real living being. The more I remember, the more I'm influenced, the more it's like I live stream those qualities of peace and power back into myself. And honestly, my experience has been in that state when I look at some maybe behaviors that I regret myself, or perhaps things I've said or done to other people, it keeps a perspective, and I just really have an innate strength to observe them, learn from them, and let go. And if I need to apologize to somebody, let me do it. Even if they don't apologize back, at least I fulfilled my side of the story. And if it's absolutely genuine, it should have impact. When I do it from my heart, I am absolutely sorry for what I said or did. Even if the other party doesn't respond in the same way, even if they were also guilty, because often it's both sides. I am clearing my side of the story. So I'm lessening my heaviness, my internal burden. I'm becoming light. I'm clearing myself of all these past stories. I would say, forgiveness is a huge power to heal all the wounds in the heart, the wounds in the mind, the wounds of the past, the wounds of relationships. Where do I get the strength? it's this connection with the divine. So thank you for your patience, for listening, and I would just like to offer a few thoughts of meditation. So I'd really appreciate if wherever you are, if you're sitting in front of your computer or your phone, just to put down other things, try to just not have any distractions. And I'm just going to offer a few thoughts. And if you can try and not just listen, but experience these thoughts. Wherever I am, let me sit very calmly and quietly, and just consciously feel your inner world cooling down. The spiritual journey is the journey back to self-respect. Many times I feel self-respect is difficult because of my own past actions, my own past behaviors, things that have happened in my family, in my life, that are like heavy feelings inside. I want to free myself from these feelings, so I really step back into a healthy and positive self. To begin this journey, just visualize yourself as a tiny soul. Just hold the image of a tiny point sitting in the front of the brain, in the center of the forehead. Just feel yourself gently moving beyond all the labels of your body and sitting so lightly in the forehead. I am a peaceful soul. And in this sweet state of a mind at ease, a mind at rest, look through the eye of your mind and visualize a radiant jewel of light, the form of the Supreme, the Divine. This is the highest union of the mind with the One who is an unlimited source of divine love. Become like a small child and just allow yourself to be completely loved. Feel this pure love entering the core of your being and filling your inner world with belonging, acceptance, and respect. And as I taste these feelings, I feel strong. It's like I step back into my power. And in this place of inner power, I can observe my past. I can see clearly and honestly things I've done which I want to resolve, or things others have done that I want to let go. This powerful relationship of love enables me to let go, to forgive, to move on. This is true freedom. When I free myself from punishing myself about my mistakes, my weaknesses, and even punishing others for theirs too. Just feel yourself becoming so light, so free. If each morning I wake and before I think too much about yesterday or what I have to do today, I sit, I reconnect with my permanent self, the soul, and with my permanent lover of the soul, and feel the inner strength that creates, and then step into my day in that state of self-respect and inner power. This is living a spiritual life, and living a life that enables me to forgive and heal from the wounds that sit in my past. Om Shanti. Thank you so much.